Yeah, Dr. Tripathi is on the call. So he will ask me to call you. Check it for me. Yeah, I just reached. मैं बॉम्बे से आ रहा था, तो I just got it now. Yes, sir.
Sure.
Good afternoon. Hello, good practice.
Hello, man.
Actually, I was
I've worked on most recently. Whatever project I seem to be working on is my favorite, even if it's a hard project. And this is a very interesting project because this common theme, it's about startups. And this is a completely different scenario with a completely different strategy. And I will, as you'll see, it's pretty cool. But I'll also tell you everything that happened right and wrong with it, because those truly were how we learn things, right? So I'm going to start with a question. Does anybody know what third space is?
Thank you.
Go, don't sit in his chair, you can sit next to him. Yes, okay. Right there, stop. You can sit right there. Yeah, okay. All right, so third space is a really interesting concept. Third space says that your first space is your home. Your second space is where you work. Your third space is where you do your social activities. And that's the theme, and that's the truth. So this idea, I'll tell you a little bit about the origin of the idea, and then we'll get into the deepness of this through here. But the concept was, how do you leverage third spaces for community sustainability? So to be clear, there is an epidemic going on around the world of loneliness and isolation, probably somewhat from COVID and after effects, but also just the way things are. And this program was done by a woman who had gone to school 30-something years ago, got her master's just 10 years ago, and this happened in Pittsburgh where I live, so I know this very well. And she's the one who contacted me to do some things with her on here. But Pittsburgh has a proud history of steelworking for years. So you had a lot of immigrants come in, and every immigrant brought churches with them because they all had different beliefs, you know, and many kinds of beliefs. But you're talking a city that is, by your standards, even at my standards, is small. It's only 250,000 people for the main part, and the whole region's only 2.25 million people. So, but it's a very old city for us, and within that region, there are over 600 churches. Now, some of the churches have similar connections, but many of them don't. And so think of every neighborhood street has a church on it. And that was very important 120, 130 years ago when these immigrants brought their churches with them. But as things consolidate, generations go on, a lot of churches had reduced amount of purpose. Buildings were still there. Some are starting to go in disrepair. Some might have had a congregation of, say, 600 people at one time. And some have a congregation of like 5 people right now. It all depends on the church. So she looked at her and she did her thesis to say, not in a religious aspect, although she's involved with churches, she said, what do we do with these buildings? They're important, they served a purpose, they'll probably serve a purpose again. And that's what she wrote her thesis on, and she did it saying what was third space. So that was the origin of what was going on as a setup. So this goes a little bit into this. So definition I just talked about, the 3 things of what third space is. First is your home, second is work, third is your place in community. Now, if you were to look this up on the internet right now, they would say the origins was in 1989, when a very large study was done by this gentleman right here, Ray Alstenberg, who said Starbucks is a third space. A bar could be a third space. A swimming club could be a third space. And why these are important, because he was studying this idea of loneliness and things across their back in '89 as we were looking at that. These other images, though, is proof that this is a much older concept, and it probably goes back thousands of years, to be honest, right, these ideas. But in Pittsburgh, in the area that she was studying, she did a map of just a small range and said, every red dot here is a church. They're all active, but they're all underutilized. And they still could be doing something through here. And then these are just some images of what makes up Pittsburgh back then. So we had a large amount of immigrants, mostly coming from Eastern Europe at that period. So this would be perhaps the father, you know, and he's working in the steel mills coming across here. So these are steel workers. This is the family, you know, living in these conditions here. This is the mythical character. This is Joe Mazeroski. So I don't know if you've ever heard of like Paul Bunyan. He's a little bit more famous. So if you lived up north in the United States, it's the lumberjack, and he had a blue ox, and he was, you know, 17 foot tall, and he could cut down forests with a single swing. Well, Pittsburgh had a man so strong that he was 18 feet tall, and he could bend metal with his hands, and you know that signified strength here. So these are the immigrants that used the churches with them as third spaces, or the bars, and so forth. And then these are the ones that existed, but they were not being used anymore. So that was the context, and that's what she did her study on. So her concept was this. She goes to one of these churches. She's actively involved with it at an administration and at a community service level, but it's a beautiful church, in my opinion. It's hard to see this, but it kind of has a European Gothic flair. It was built in the 1890s. It has a cool history to it. And it was a very wealthy church. Andrew Carnegie went to this church. Other very famous industrialists. So it's got Tiffany windows and all of these things. And it has, if you look at these pictures here, beautiful place where you sit in prayer and do worship. It has outside gardens. It has areas where they had community stores. It actually has a giant kitchen that is as large as any restaurant in there, because at one time it served a congregation of 800 people. The congregation currently is 32 people. And they still use the kitchen, but there's a lot of room in this church. They had areas back in the 50s, 1950s, there was a bowling alley in here in the church. And there was a stage. So there used to be musical performances, and they still do music there, but there was a formal stage. Other than the kitchen and the store, they're not using any of it except for the worship area. So at one time, that church had a lot more activity that was going on here. So the concept was this. How do I address that question about loneliness and creating informal social spaces? And the catalyst was a single church member that said, I'd like to do this. And they said no. It's not what the church is about. We don't trust what's going to happen to the space, and all of these things. And what she did is she said, I'm going to ask for forgiveness later, permission later, just ask for forgiveness. I'm just doing it. I'm just going to do it. So, ropes in, or gets 2 other people to work on it with her, and she takes it forward. And she uses guerrilla tactics of low budget, quick actions that she can control, and things that can happen fast. And this is what these pictures represent right here. So with these 2 other people, they say, what do we need? We need an attractive logo. We need this idea of some posters. Maybe a social media campaign, maybe not. But how do I do this quickly? Dr. Shapathi, just to give you context, we're talking about third spaces through here. Do you want me to go back at all, or just continue?
No.
Okay, great. So she takes this on through here and says what's doable. And what she then does is we have 6 major universities within our city. And they're all different levels. So the University of Pittsburgh, big public university. Private university is Carnegie Mellon University. It's about 24,000 at Pitt. Carnegie Mellon is obviously AI. Pitt is a lot to do with philosophy and law and doctors. Chatham University is a very specialized school, almost like Harvard. Only about 3,000 students get to go there, very high end. Carlow College is a 120-year-old school that is a Catholic school, and this church isn't Catholic, by the way, but it trains nurses in community service, basically. Duquesne University, which is equivalent to a Georgetown or a Boston University. So they're a Jesuit school, critical thinking, kind of a different level of thinking. And CCAC is a community college of 2-year degrees. So for most of the population that can't afford to go this, we approached each one of these schools, got to a vice chancellor level to say, we would like to have students come in and do a workshop and say, what would they use a third space for? Nothing to do with the church as a religion, but if they had access to this church and if the church was able to fund their ideas, would they get involved? And all of the chancellors said, yes, we'll support this. So then we did this guerrilla campaign, created that poster, that cool little logo to get attention. And these are some of the streets of Pittsburgh. And we talked with some students, and they said, these are the traffic areas that people would look at. These certain places that people hang out. And just went around and just knocked on doors, and they hung posters up and stuck them on crowded boards and just tried to get the word out. And when we asked each of the deans that we had approached, saying, is there a single student that could become a champion to get other students to show up here? So we identified a few. Some were from business school, some were from theater school, just depending on what the universities had. So all this is going forward, and we get the idea is to have these students co-design the process. They weren't able to do it because it was finals or midterms, but they committed to coming. And this is when they brought me on to say, could you help design this workshop? It can only last for 3 or 4 hours. We're going to do it in 2 weeks. And I said, yes, let's figure this out. So this was the setup. This is actually a quick fast forward to the workshop itself. So this idea of coming in and giving simple tools to allow people to express ideas. So what I did is I designed a template that said, how do we look at ideas equally? The idea of what you're doing in the center, and then there were certain things. How would you market it? Do you need financing? How many people would actually use your idea? It was like that. And we gave them templates to show how it would work, but we also said it has to get done in 2 hours, and we ran it like a design thinking session. And for the event, we gave a very clear idea of what the event was going to be. We knew the activities were going to be brainstorming. We called poster creation was the creation of their ideas. And they sat these groups to go ahead and come across here. These are the only materials we gave them. Markers, some scissors, gave them a tour of the church, talked a little bit about the history. Didn't want to influence them too much, but they could understand the spaces. And I'll talk about these images in a second. So we get online registration, we get 50 people signed up for this. We're all set to go. And by the way, there's a group of other people that are there. Church members have nothing to do with about religion, but they say, we're going to go in the kitchen and we're going to cook food for everybody. And we're going to make sure that they just are taken care of, but we're going to stay out of the room. But we also wanted them to hear the presentations at the end, because ultimately it affects those individuals going to the church also. But they would have no say on it. Every idea was going to be approved. There was really no reason to, and the church would fund it going forward as community service. So what happens with your best plans? Anybody tell me? So what happens when you have a plan? Within 5 minutes, you get punched in the nose and you have to change your plan. It happens in everything, right? So, 4 students showed up. So what do? You got 12 tables set up, you've got all your exercises designed, you've got somebody who has risked their thesis idea, even though the church said they do it, still got people to show up, and all of these things, right? So we decided in 2 minutes, I decided saying, let's bring the people out of the kitchen and put them into the workshop. And maybe not change up the idea, but just mix the groups up. We made sure the students stayed in one group, those 4 students. Those are the 4 students that showed up. And we just said, these were the kitchen workers and the janitors in the building. they're there doing a workshop with us. And they're saying how the space should be used. Actually, it was probably a great idea that we didn't think of, right? So you pivot and you change and you take advantage of it. So going through all of these exercises was the idea that within the 2 hours, we ended up with 19 ideas. So we generated 19 ideas. One of the things that I kind of skipped over, and I should mention, does anybody know what bingo is? You play bingo? Okay, bingo is it's pretty much an old person's game. It's older than me, but it's an old person's game. And it's almost like gambling, but it's not really gambling. Somebody stands up there and they have a little tumbler and it has these little discs, and on each disc is a number and a letter. And they call the number and you have a card in front of you, and if your 5 numbers are called on your random thing, the person goes bingo, and you get to walk up and you get a prize. So we went ahead and did that as an icebreaker at the beginning of the exercise. And people played bingo for 3 rounds, and it was just an icebreaker, and they got to know each other through there. And the reason I bring it is because it comes back. So we generated 19 ideas in 2 hours, and we ranked them. So we actually worked on the ideas. They were presented. Everybody had to present their ideas. They had 2 minutes to present an idea to everybody. And then we did dot voting. Everybody had 3 dots. We had about 25 participants with the rest of the staff there. And everybody had 3 dots. They could put in whatever idea they liked. We ended up with a scatter graph of the 19 ideas of which ones were most popular and why and things like that. And the idea was for the whole concept of running this program, including the food, including creating the posters, including doing the things like that, it was $500 US. And once again, I know the economics are different here, but that's like nothing. I mean, it's to run a program, nothing, right? And it was about 100 hours of voluntary for 3 people to do this whole program. And feedback was very good. We made sure there was a copy of, survey that came back that told us what was going on. Everybody ranked very well, and it was honest ranking. And the winning ideas, they were all over the place, but it was amazing that even just the 4 students, those were the ideas that still surfaced. And it wasn't because everybody said they were the 4 students who were going to vote on their ideas. It was they had the best ideas of how to think about that space. And out of all 19, we're going forward. These might sound obvious to you, like food trucks. Students like food trucks. Could there be food trucks at the church on certain days? Yes, that's doable. A study space, which might have been obvious, but we really didn't know, because when final exams and midterms take place, it's hard to find a quiet place to study. So suddenly, if you could come to a building and know that you have quiet space and internet access, and maybe mentors or just someplace to hang out in the garden or something, the church is now available to these 6 institutions if that's where you want to study. Made that available, instant to do. College bingo, this is my favorite one, because never would have thought of this idea. So when we did the bingo in the beginning, we had some very small gifts, a couple of little cash cards from Amazon to the first couple of those. You get to go to the table and choose what you want. So the number 1 idea that they liked was bingo. And they said, what we really want for prizes is toilet paper, laundry detergent, things that I don't want to spend my money on, but I need every day in college. And they said, if you would do this once a month, I would show up and have bingo, we'd have some fun, and I'd walk out with my half the dry goods that I need. So we're saying, okay, we can do that. So the church now goes and buys at a large shop, and they just put a table of this stuff out. 200 students showed up to the first bingo, saying, guess what, guys, you can come get this, and they told their friends. So it's kind of cool. So that's an idea we never would have thought of. And a cooking club. I talked about having that large kitchen. So they figured out some of the students are nutritionists, but everybody wants to eat well, but they have no time to cook. So they now come together on a Monday night, and everybody cooks large meals with the church cooks, and they make meals for everybody for the week, and everybody takes it home. So it's kind of a cool idea. So that's how they're already using it within 3 weeks of starting this program. It's showing real quick traction here. So, and then there's other longer term programs which I'm going to show, which is the bigger idea. So part 2 of the story here. Before I get into this, because this is where I think it's interesting. Any questions or thoughts about that first idea of a startup that was actually very little to do with technology, but more to do with just one person saying, I can go get this done, and just doing it at a low cost. Okay, it's fine. We'll keep on going. We'll see if these things go forward. So now we're going to get more complicated. So, by the way, here's the poster out in the church. They'll sit out front there. More of these third space events will take place. So, the second program is called Powered by the Sun. Now, this is spelled differently than sun, but this is kind of the church-related idea of the sun, right? You still have to associate with church. And the idea is this: how to transform the church into a net zero church. And because this church has a unique feature for the kinds of buildings that we have for churches all over the city, it has a large flat roof that doesn't exist on any other church in the area. And the idea is saying, why not turn that into a renewable energy source? Can we do the roofing on there, put solar in there, do some things across there? That's the goal. So this is where we're engaging these students. So what's going to happen in June is a hackathon to prove the technology. And we've already talked to Pitt Engineer School and Carnegie Mellon, and they're taking their classes in right now, and they're studying this as a class project, and they're going to come up with designs of how to make the church do this, and they'll get class credit for this. So this is how it's going to work. And what I think it's going to head to is actually a voltaic agricultural solution with both roof garden and solar. They think they can do both off of here, but we'll see where it goes. But the idea is to start taking this church into this realm here, and it gets very, very interesting. So we have universities and students, we have the church, and we say, who's going to install this? It's not going to be a large company. We said, why not invite local small businesses, vendors who put up roofs, who are doing some solar installations for houses, and have them be part of this, because they could get the contracts, help their businesses, and students would work side by side, basically doing the installations with them and taking their knowledge, but also learning how to physically use the tools and understand what it is to run a business. Their businesses will get some money doing this, and we're starting to make this connection of trade and actual hands-on along with academics. And it becomes a real lab. And then we're also looking at contractors around wind, water, and waste as part of the problem. So they're also looking at this together. But the idea is they're going to build this together. And we know that the key features are going to be the solar panels. We know that there's going to be some renewable energy components. And then we're going to expand it into another idea. Because another issue that's happening, who else needs third space, although we all need third space, is we have an elderly population right now. People are living longer than ever before. They tend to retire in the United States around 65, 67 years of age. And either they're fortunate enough, they have enough money they can live where they live, but sometimes health doesn't allow them to do that, so they tend to move into communities that are more sustainable for them to live a good life as much as they can, or they move back with their families. But a lot of people still want their independence. So there is a building right behind the church that used to be a prep school that was empty. So the church bought that building, and they don't know what to do with it. So what was proposed in one of those 19 ideas, because we toured that too, they said, why don't we turn that into living quarters for people who are old, that are still active, but don't want to leave their lives in the city, and they could use the third space church too, and we'll see what happens. So we're going to run the next workshop with both those elements now, students and the elderly, and see if there's a match. We know they both like to play bingo. Maybe there'll be traditions passed on, maybe we'll cook together, maybe they'll fight, I don't know. But it starts to solve, and I think it's going to be a good thing, right? To toast there. So now we're involving in this, and we'll start building that generational ties. So this is projected what is going to happen, these images here. So we know there'll be some kind of activities through here. We know that we're going to be using engineers from the schools, and we're going to be using local contractors that the students will be learning trades from, and maybe they'll go into business with it. Who knows? We'll see what happens across here. And we know that we'll put in some things like wind, do some tests there, and we will be able to power an electric vehicle that will be dedicated for the students and for the elderly to go on field trips or whatever they need to do, and it'll all be energy free. Now, we talked to the city because we need permits for this, and they said if we can do this, they will allow 40 other churches to take this on and just give us the permits and just copy the model. So, pretty cool for one student and one person to be able to move it this quickly. June is when this is taking place. We've already had some contractors look at this and they said we can get this done by next March. So we'll talk about that, Dr. Chapathi, that I can get a church to net zero by next March. Okay? Using students, using local contractors, and getting through city permits here. Now, there's always a story of what is different. Why does this model work? Here's the secret. The traditional approach, I'm actually going to stand in front of this. When we think about climate solutions, what is the first thing that you do? I keep on looking at you because I don't know. You tell me, how would you approach this? When you're given an assignment to solve for climate, how do you take it on? What's the first thing that you do?
First of all, from my end, I will try to stop like such kind of activity which harms our climate too much.
Mm-hmm.
I will suppress to use petroleum vehicles for everything and plastics and all these from my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody else, another example. I want like 3 examples.
Yeah, adding to what ma'am saying that changing our lifestyle is one thing, but currently I'm working in my area, so the problems I think will solve in my lab. So I work in solar energy research, so I think the problems will be solved in my lab, so I need to do that thing.
Okay, so you're looking at the technology that's going to
Yeah.
solve. One other person. Go ahead.
Reusing the things.
Okay, reusing circularity, right? So you're thinking of these things. So you're thinking about climate, right? And how you're going to impact climate. This is how we reverse the model here. So the traditional way is focusing on reducing carbon emissions, right? Considerations, you're thinking about environment and you're thinking about social impact. And the programs that you're thinking could be some for this kind of thing I've been talking about is CSR, corporate social responsibility, and we're going to make the church this and it's going to be better for everybody, and great, it's also going to use the third space. We reversed the model here. We said, let's focus on this idea of community and social interaction first. Let's not worry about climate. Let's look at it from a perspective of what's going to work in the community and what's going to solve that social issues that are identified through the workshops. In this case, we'll stick with loneliness and this idea of isolation. And when we solve for that, we will use as many sustainable solutions as possible. Knowing in the background, we are targeting the net zero, but I'll tell you what, if net zero gets in the way of solving for loneliness, loneliness is more important to solving for climate, because that's what the community needs, or else nobody's going to use it. It's great that it's net zero, but it's more important that it's actually being used in solving the social issues across there. Now, fortunately, we're very green in Pittsburgh, so we have high confidence that this is going to make sense, and it will make sense. It's already been proven out here. So once again, this idea that we know school lab ideas, community, this is what we're focused on. But this is the trick of why this is going to work, looking at this. And I believe that this is not just for this situation. I think if we look at most climate solutions, when I see why they fail or why they get delayed, it's too much focus on the technology, which has to happen. We think of that first as opposed to truly looking at the problem statement and solving for that first. And I think that's why there's a lot of pushback around the world, around climate, saying a lot of money is being dumped into this, renewable energies are coming on board, but I'm still unemployed, or I don't have a good house to live in, or I'm lonely. So those things should be part of the path, but that's what people relate to. So I think it's a matter of structuring and doing both, but maybe putting one in front of the other, at least to get the buy-in. Often when we look at a cycle of solving for something, I'm going to do technology, I'm going to do a full LCA of what something goes through, I'm going to commercialize it, I'm going to make it active, and then I'm going to talk to people why they're going to use it. Maybe we should talk to people why they're going to use it first, and then design our technology solutions based off of that. That's what my lesson is here. So, this is where it gets the benefits. A couple pages of it because it's important. So for the students, what it's created is there's a platform for them to connect. They've got that space, they're working on an active project, and they're connecting with other people and themselves. 6 other universities on there, right? Some of the programs will be bi-weekly, some will be monthly, some will be half a year, some will be daily. They can study there every day if they want. They're going to develop leadership and teamwork skills in here because they are owning what's going on here with the support that we're giving them, and they're learning management skills. They're delivering community service, so we are actually issuing community service certificates that are approved by the schools. So the schools are actually giving them credit and they get an official document through here, coming across here. And it's also facilitating better relationships with their peers and their professors. Because when we looked at scoping out the roof, the head of engineering from Pitt said, I'm in on this, and he was looking on the roof with the students, not as a teacher saying, sitting there side by side, testing out the levels, because I'm really interested in seeing how this works. It's fun. It's what I want to do on my Saturday. So it's just building a different relationship. And it's also changing education, because it's not just taking it out of the classroom, but it's saying, maybe the skills I learned working with an actual roofer putting in solar is different than what I learned in a lab, right? I'm understanding I might have to run to get tools 3 times, or the reality is I don't have all the sensors. There's just things that, the reality is X through here. So for the church, what the church happens, it's starting to strengthen that local ties back with the community. It's getting reuse of the building. The church would love to have larger congregations, but it's not to give them larger congregations. But what naturally will happen is people are using it, and they will probably come see the music, and they might interact with people. So there's a good chance it's going to happen. It's also helping the universities be an outlet right here. It revitalizes that church space as a vital community hub. Goes back to that third space idea. It's enhancing the reputation as a proactive and inclusive leader in the community. So it's really rebranding. One of the issues with smart city design, is anybody like focusing on that, because it's really what my background is? Is anybody doing like smart city planning or design? Okay. One of the issues is, I wrote a book on this, is that whenever we look at it, we say transportation, we say office buildings, we say housing residences. The one they never talk about are religious buildings. I don't know why. And I actually asked somebody when I researched my book, who was a very interesting long-term person. And he said, because churches, at least in the United States, are for the disenfranchised. So nobody knows where they place in this idea of smart cities. Nobody's looking at it, at least in the US and in Europe. Perhaps they are here. Maybe with Dharma, maybe it's a little bit more connected, but it's not in other parts of the world. So it's trying to understand that a little bit more. And then for the community, you're now creating an inclusive space, which is part of sustainability, inclusivity, to have diverse groups that are intergenerational interactions, old and young in different levels coming across here. You're preserving cultural heritage by keeping these buildings going forward, but they're adapting to modern needs, right? We're helping that push across there, and we're just going back to addressing that original question that we were solving for in the first place. I broke this into 2 different levels, because, again, so now I'm looking a little bit more from what more do students get. They're getting practical experience in sustainability and engineering in this particular project. They're learning about sustainability and about engineering. They're encouraging innovative thinking and problem solving on a real world, taking an old building is really hard. They're enjoying it. They're actually saying, this is a project I want to get out of the classroom, I want to go solve and fix this thing. And they're working with other people they normally aren't working, and they're using cutting edge technologies. There is no rules. They're the ones who are deciding what should be used and tested. So it's all really good. And they're getting cross-field collaboration. So now you have engineers working with environment, working with political science and social people that are taking their classes here, and they're now just working together on a project. And maybe that couldn't happen staying in each of the schools, but now it's being forced. And not only it's not one school, it's 6 different universities that are happening, including the kids that are going to the 2-year school, because that's all that they can afford. So they're interacting with the graduates and the doctorates. So it's all really very good. For the church, they're now being seen as a leader of sustainability, I kind of answered my own question. It says, why aren't churches involved in smart city design? This might be the path to start understanding what the role is. I don't know the answer yet. It's reducing the energy costs for the buildings. It's gaining community support because there's proactive sustainability steps that are being seen in the community, which is very, very important. And it's ensuring the long-term viability through the sustainability practices. And then the community itself, it's reducing the carbon footprint, okay? That's the goal. And it's promoting eco-friendly practices that's taking place. It's creating job opportunities. And I'll show you some statistics on that in just a moment here. And particularly, it's promoting job opportunities for small and medium enterprises. This is not, no large company saying I'm going to put a roof on your building. But I guarantee you 5 roofer companies of 3 or 4 or 5 people saying this is a big project for me. And this is great. It serves as a living lab for sustainability education going forward. And it strengthens that whole intergenerational tie. So this is the economic side of it. So lessons learned when it comes to sustainability, unless you have a provable ROI, that's economic, it's very hard for it to go on forward. That's just the way it is. But somehow it still comes back to kind of at least break even, hopefully be better than break even. So in the big areas, no matter what project you have, what's looked at from a green benefit, it's about reducing wastewater, all the things we talk about every day. How do we improve neighborhood values of the value of the properties themselves that increase? There are more green jobs. How do we reduce flood damage controls and other environmental aspects? This is what we're solving for on here. So in the US, when you do a project like this successfully, the property values of that neighborhood are predicted to go up by 5 to 20%. Just the property alone, without doing anything else for the houses around it, just the fact that this church is doing this increases their property value. So it's very cool. Secondly, the job creation, I've hinted at this, is saying that renewable energy jobs, whether you're a hands-on tradesman or whether you're the head of a company, it's a big business. Over 250,000 jobs have been created in green technologies through there, but most of them are for small and medium companies. So this helps you understand, where these trades are going to be applied. We know that this net zero buildings can reduce the energy cost by 80%. So that's actually helping that across there. And in this case, we're going to be energy positive. I talked about that second building. There's enough leftover energy according to the engineer calculations, so they're able to pay for the energy for the other building. So those senior citizens will have no utility bills, which means their economic status goes up. They have more money to spend on things and do things with. They'll have no water bill. They'll have no waste collection bill because there's enough excess that's happening through the systems here. Plus, I'm giving them transportation and an EV vehicle to take them anywhere they want. So they don't even have to own a car anymore or depend on others. And they can also cook in the kitchens and not have to have a kitchen and cook for a week if they want or be the cooks. It's just all very good. We know that the economic multiplier is this. For every $4 invested in a project like this, there's a return for every $1 you get $4 back. So if I end up putting 200,000 US dollars to get the roof installed, the energy changed, the buildings connected, all that kind of stuff, I'm going to see close to $1 million in return on that investment. It's very, very easy to get that loan. In this case, the church is just going to fund it. They have an endowment. They want to do this. And like I said, the city will multiply what's going on here. And then we know health and productivity. This is really good for mindfulness, this idea, and this idea of being less stressed. So this whole concept has social benefits also. It's strengthening those community bonds. It's sense of belonging coming across. Cultural preservation of the buildings, mental well-being taking place, and empowerment through here. This was one idea that came out of a 2-hour workshop that was able to push the funding through, started by those 3 people, and is now being championed by 15 people from different groups, and by some of the school leaders, but mostly by the students. And this is what's, June is, it's happening. They're actually measuring out the ceiling and they're getting ready to start this going through here, and we'll see where it goes coming across here. So as I thought about this, I took just two areas close to here. So I said, how could you apply this to Delhi? Okay, possibilities here. What are the challenges? Maybe it's not loneliness, so maybe it's urban congestion, maybe it's governance issues, it's environmental stress issues. So what are the opportunities? You could utilize community centers, parks, public spaces for third spaces, if you were to expand on this idea. You could implement net zero solutions in public buildings, schools, community centers. You could partner with other universities, perhaps. You could leverage historical sites through here. The potential outcomes, it's the same thing. Maybe you're reducing loneliness, you're enhancing urban biodiversity. Whatever the research that you're doing, you have this opportunity to come across here and so forth. I didn't do any deep study on this, but it's just an example of maybe how to think about it. And to give a contrast, let's say if we look at a different environment, so we look up north. I would say there's a different set of challenges. I would say perhaps it's rural development is the challenge, and it's access to resources. It could be natural disasters that we're thinking about. So there's opportunities to utilize, once again, these kinds of ideas. And I don't have to solve this for you. It would have a different formula, but the idea that I wanted to say is kind of to kind of spur the conversation of what I'm talking about here. What do you think about this kind of approach and idea? It's completely different than the other idea, but it's very viable. It was done through low cost, single groups of 2 or 3 individuals with the support that they had. And there was a lot of chance for creativity. There's proof enough to go ahead to already say how would we scale this. So we can develop a model that's adaptable to local contexts coming across there. We can form partnerships that make sense in the local area. We've proved that. Seeking funding for grants for these programs, you always have to go find the money, but when you can prove the ROI and show who it's impacting, you can find something. It doesn't take a lot of money to do this. You can actually crowdsource this kind of project. The training is very interesting, right? It's training in design thinking, it's training in perhaps hands-on implementation of solutions, it's training of interaction, and then there's the technology integration. The science can get pretty heavy on this one, and that's fine, because what the roofers really like, they have a standard way of putting in a solar panel. It's a dumb panel with a smart sensor. But Carnegie Mellon and Pitt are saying, we want to run a new technology idea on top of this to get some kind of data off of here, because we want to test some things on here. So it's kind of an interesting lab that we'll be continuing to go through here. And the conclusion on this for me is saying that the application was that the third spaces and the net zero initiatives could happen locally here. I can't see why it wouldn't work here. It could work anywhere in the world. The goal is you want to create vibrant, sustainable communities, and the benefits, you're addressing social environmental challenges, you're fostering community resilience and commitment, right? Getting the communities to participate, and you're promoting innovation, because innovation is just not technology innovation or economic innovation. You're other kinds of ways of rethinking problems. So as I started, I said, this was a very different way of a startup than the first way of this big national lab program and very important science. This was a single individual doing what they thought, I see a bunch of buildings that aren't being used. I don't have to be a large company to make a change. And I can find a value, in this case it was third spaces. So that's my presentation. Love for questions, thoughts, ideas.
So sir, main concern, one concern is like continuity of the funding here, because we are seeing in most of the ideas, the users are not the payers here. They will not be paying the thing. So how do you think that the continuity of funding will be there? Because most of the things are coming from donation and something like that.
Yes, so it is a great question, and you have to look at that. So there's two things about it. The funding to install the solar thing, that one's covered for the first thing. So we've got 10 years of that's covered. The building is free to use, so there's no rent to use the building. The food, there'll be a budget for the food, but we're not asking the students or the older people. The church will do that. The church has a pretty good endowment, and they feel that's how money should be used anyway for the community. There's another aspect, though, to which I would build on top of this is, how will the program continue? Because students are transient, right? They'll be there for 4 years, and they'll have different wants and needs and go other places, but they'll always be replenished. There'll always be a next wave of students. So part of what will have to be is, how do you pass on the torch? Guess what? Students will always want to study. If they know that there's a safe place to do things that's their own, that bingo that they're always getting the toilet paper, the things they don't want to spend their money on, pretty chance they're going to do that. And the fact is that there are other programs, music. There's somebody who's going to teach financial management for them, how to do finances. There's going to be other ideas, field trips to interesting architectural places. We will run workshops 4 times a year to refresh those ideas, and we'll just pass it on. So I think it will be sustainable, but we'll find out, right? We're just doing it. We'll see where it goes.
So it was a very nice initiative, but my question is, you started with 2 to 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have a huge crew who are working in this. So is there any specific criteria that when you choose people for the third space, or to utilize their expertise in your project, is there some criteria when you are choosing people for your this third space?
Sure, it's a great question. So the original 3 people were just 3 people. We talked about them enough. The students that are participating we chose student leaders of clubs, because we knew they would network. Like, one student might say, I'm part of the business club, therefore I communicate with 100 people. Maybe 100 people won't show up, but it's that. So we chose student leaders in the theater group and stuff, and we keep on hanging posters, and we just let the schools do that. And there's support by the deans to do this. And there's even talk about using this in the classrooms as a teaching model to kind of encourage it. So we know that part is there. But to do the construction, right, that is a building. So that is just like putting a roof on a building or putting in new electrics and things. That is voted on by the church and who's owning the building through there, and they've approved that. So they're responsible for that going forward. So there'll be professionals that will be hired, but the professionals have agreed to let Carnegie Mellon engineer the solution as a teaching class. So we'll see. And the other 18 ideas are different 18 ideas, right? So we'll see where they go, but for this particular idea, that's how those are being covered. How would you do this in Kanpur?
I think so this music class, dance class, these kind of things will sustainable here, because you can run through and users can do things. And old age people, the loneliness problem is in the old age only. So the study was 100-year-old, you were telling. So we need to look about the loneliness in this current era of internet. So one idea like old age people and this activity sort of thing. So in the spaces with music, some sports malls, that can be done.
Ideas. So one of the things that I would offer Dr. Shavathi, I don't know schedule-wise this time around, but I did this entire workshop in 2 hours, and we had 19 ideas come out. So if you wanted to do this with a group of students to solve for the ideas, I don't remember exactly when you came in, but first part of the presentation, this part right here. We ran this workshop, simple posters, paper, ran an agenda through here, voted, created a scattergraph of ideas, ranked them, and all this stuff, did it in 2 hours. We could do something like that together and come out with 10 to 20 ideas with this group. I'm sure we could at some time. It's a possibility, right? It would be fun. So, what do you think the risks are of doing something like this? same two people talking to other people, okay? You guys, I know you're smart, so you told me that, so it's good. And I know you have these ideas, and I'll talk to you afterwards, but other people. Okay, you sat right next to me, so I'm going to pick on you. Risks. Do you see risks in something like this? Why would this fail?
Sir, might be if it didn't continue.
Okay, that's right. I think that's a risk.
Funding.
Funding. Funding is always a risk. Your whole life, funding will be a risk, right? So, how do you mitigate that?
Funding, we can approach some stakeholders, but that continuity should be there. So that's the problem.
Maybe you reduce the scope. Maybe you don't put solar on the roof. Maybe it's enough to simply have the third space being used for now.
Yeah.
And you prove that enough people are doing this, and maybe you calculate the energy savings of converting the building over is going to pay for it. You know, you might have to do it in stages, you know, to prove across there. But yeah, your whole life you're going to have to make compromises, and you're going to make pivots. I talked about that pivot that I said I thought 50 students were going to show up. I didn't get that, so I took the people out of the kitchen and I put them in the workshop, and it actually helped. Because they're the ones that said we could cook food for everybody, and everybody could take a meal home and have a fresh cooking all week. And we'll just keep on changing the menus. And then one of the professors who went to the church, who participated, said, why don't we have some nutritionists in there so that we cook healthy foods, right? And so it was interesting. The music in the theater came up also. It was crazy. A German professor who teaches at Pitt, who's always quiet, he's like, I think we should do plays and operas. And it was like, well, I don't know if we do an opera. That's up to you, because I'm not going to do it. He says, well, maybe we could have comedy night instead, or music night. But what that is, you could say, well, that teaches people to speak in front of folks, or you come and play music together, or things like that. And that also solves the loneliness issue. So the students are dictating what's going to take place with it. And as long as it doesn't do something that's injustice, or you know, we would have rules that you can't discriminate or other things. And the rule for the church is not to teach religion. If you want to be a religious, something is one of the ideas, it certainly would support that. But there's no obligation, and the church is not pushing religion onto these groups. One of the groups said that they would like to do something with their study hall, and they're a faith-based group. We said, that's fine as long as it's not imposing it on others, and you know, they have the proper guards on it and things. So we just make sure that everybody's as equal as possible on here. I know that I just used my time. I've got more time to answer questions either here or afterwards. I guess my last question now, you've seen two things. You saw a national program, which I think is much more aligned to what you're taught at school about research and opening up a business or using IP. And now you're seeing more of a community-focused one, still done by someone who did their master's in sociology and things. So it's still that strict academic, but took a different approach, because she realized she would never be able to accomplish all the gateways and things. And she said, I could solve this empty building issue and these other issues, and I can do it for $500, and then we'll get more money afterwards and get moving. So they're both valid solutions. Where do you see things are common, and where, I mean, do they both work? Or, I mean, I'm still learning as I'm going through, right? This is the first time I've done something at this kind of work, but I think this one actually is going to move quicker than the other one, to be honest. I'm kind of amazed. 2 years with Berkeley, and we have all these ideas, and 8 companies are coming out. This $500 going to be, you know, the first month already have 4 ideas up and running, and it will probably raise the value of a neighborhood by millions of dollars simply by interaction. So they're both valid models. So I don't know. I'm looking for feedback also, because I'm learning every day too. Go ahead. I didn't shut it down for yeah.
So actually, if we are researching in our lab, we are more concerned for our environment, our climate. And as a solar cell worker, I will speak in context of that much. So in that case, we want that in future we will sustain in a better way in terms of energy. But when you go through these kind of ideas, actually we are doing it for people only, but actually when you relate directly to the people, you are directly connecting to the people, understanding their problems and resolving it at a present stage. We are doing for future and they are resolving it for present. So these two play a major role for development of our
Right.
society and for mental health also. So if one is only working on research and publishing papers and that, and other people I will compare that is more like connected to this third space and also working in the research. When you measure the mental health, the second one will be more happier because he or she is contributing in both aspects of life. So I think both ideas are good, but together, putting together, they will be best.
And that's why I think you're the right group. I'll tell you what I would be doing, and I haven't been here long enough, so Dr. Garg took me to walk through the campus the other day, and he's a runner in the morning, and he gave us his running day to walk me through so I can get familiar, and all he did was talk about the trash. And it is shameful, I just have to say it. It's just absolutely shameful looking through that stuff, and I can't criticize this, I don't know why, but it's there. And I would say most of those things you could clean up in probably a month if everybody just kind of did it, and that would be coming right back. It's obvious why it happens. I think a program like this could say, how do I solve for the waste, right? Because it's more of a behavioral change. Because the technology is probably bins and then collection, but it's mostly behavior. Don't put trash out, or when you see it, pick it up, or maybe there's some sensors that recognize the trash is. The big program at Berkeley would not solve the waste issue. It would not stop people from doing what they're doing or animals getting into it. So that's the way I look at it too. But I think you can solve the waste problem. I do. I think it'd take a lot of work, but you keep on doing it over and over and over again until you did the behavioral change. So this kind of approach would probably maybe make it actually go longer than a 6-month fix. So anyway, I do appreciate your time. I know it's your Saturday. Said I can talk forever. I love to talk. So I'm willing to be as long as you are, but I also don't feel obligated that.
Okay, so let's thank Cody for
Okay. Thank you so much. I hope some of you are going to come to the other ones if it's possible, because they're completely different studies. The other one's going to be about smart cities. Another one is about a really interesting program on designing green industrial cities in Africa and the economic modeling behind it and building hydrogen corridors. So going to be different levels of what we're going to talk about. Okay.